So the next step for us in this app is we want to make it so that when we hit login and we have the right username and password combination, right now we don't have that, that will actually log us in, and then we can see a list of all the users in the app. So if you'd like to do this as a challenge, they're just going to show up in a new list view in another activity. You can go ahead and try that, or you can just come along with me. So if you want to go do that as a challenge, hit pause now. But if you're here to come along with me, let's go ahead, and the first thing that we want to do is we want to make a new activity that we can move to. So let's make a new activity here. And with this, we just want an empty activity. And as far as the name goes, you can choose whatever you want, but I think probably something like user list activity describes what should be going on inside of this activity. So that will go ahead and create. The next thing that we need to do is update the visual side of this user list activity. So we'll give this a second to update here, but basically we're just going to add a list view that's going to take up the entire screen here. So give Android Studio a second here to finish its business. All right, so we finally got that loaded up, and again, we just want to take a list view and have it fill up the whole screen. So we'll add that here, and with that, it's taking up most of the screen, so we'll just go ahead and add some constraints around the edge, and we'll give it an ID of list view so that we can access it inside of our app. All right, with that in place, let's move over to the user list activity. And I guess before we do that, maybe we should write the code to get to this activity first. Then we can worry about filling up that list view, right? Because if we wrote the code to see the list view, but we can't get to it, well, we're going to have a problem. So the first place that we want to go to is there's a lot of different situations where we want to go to that activity if they are able to successfully sign up, or they're able to successfully log in, or they're just logged in from the get-go. And so let's make a method that we can just call whenever we want to, that will move us to that next activity. So I'm going to call this public void and show user list. Nothing special about this name, it's just what I've decided to call it. And in here, basically what we want to do is create an intent that we'll call intent. This will be a new intent where we get the application context, and we want to move to the user list activity dot class. Okay, so that'll get us there, and then if well, that gives us the intent. If we want to go move there, we're going to have to say start activity and then pass that intent right inside. So once we have that in place, we now have to figure out where it is that we want to call this. So again, this show user list, we should do this after the user successfully is able to sign up. So we'll say show user list there. If they're able to successfully log in, that's the situation when we would want to show the user list. And there's one more that's, if they open up the app and they've already been logged in, well, then we would want to automatically take them there. So we're going to add one more piece of code here where we'll do an if statement to just see if somebody has logged in already, and if they are, we'll just take them there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go get to our parse user, and with our parse user we are going to do dot get current user, and we're going to see if this is not equal to null. And if it's not equal to null, well, then that means that we can go ahead, oh, not what I wanted to copy paste. That means that we'll be able to do the show user list. So we'll just go ahead and type that in there. Okay, so that'll get us to the correct location. And now the next part for us is to actually set up that list view. So let's move over to our list view activity and just write sort of the generic code that we've done over and over again to fill up a list view. So we're going to type out list view, and you can go ahead and call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it lowercase list view. I'm going to say this is equal to find user ID r.id. List view. I'm kind of blowing through this because we've done this so many times. This should almost be second nature for you. Then we need to create an array list that's going to be of a bunch of strings. That's going to be the name of the users. So let's go ahead and call this something like usernames. And once we have this, we'll say this is equal to a new capital array list. And we want to specify that this should be a bunch of strings inside of there. After we have that in place, let's go ahead and just add something simple in there. So we'll just say usernames.add, and we'll just put a test one in there to make sure things are working. Then after we've done that, we have to create an array adapter. So we'll make an array adapter that we'll call array adapter and say this is equal to a new array adapter, and we're going to pass in this for the context, lowercase android.r.layout. There's our simple list item 1, and then we'll pass in usernames, which is that array. So now that we've got that, really the last thing is setting the adapter on the list view. So we'll say list view.set adapter, and we'll pass in array adapter there. And with all of this, we are ready to move forward and just test and see if this is even going to work. So as we're waiting for the emulator to show up here, kind of the next steps that we're going to have to be working for is actually going and querying parse to say, hey, who are all the users? We want to add those to a particular array list and then have those show up inside of the list view. Okay, so that's going to be sort of our next step to see if we can't get things running there. And it looks like, you know, the emulator's taking a little bit of time here, so maybe let's go start working on this query in order to make that happen. So I'm going to go down here, and we're going to start a new parse query. So let's do capital parse query, except usually we put like parse object inside of here. This time we want to get parse user, so we're going to put that inside of our angled brackets, and we'll just go ahead and call this a query like we've done before, and we'll say this is equal to a new, in this case, parse user dot get query. So that's different from the parse object, and it looks like probably our emulator finished up. So because we've already logged into the app, it automatically took us here. That means our code's working and we're in a good place. Okay, so we can kind of check that box off. The next thing that we need to do is we need to sort of modify this query to handle our situation. So the big one is we want to make sure that when we get all the user objects, that we don't get the current user that's logged in. So we're going to factor that into our query by saying query dot where not equal to, and here we're going to say wherever the username, and the next parameter that we're passing inside of here is the current user's username to say, hey, we don't want this particular user. So we're going to say parse user dot get current user dot get username, and this will be a good check to see, hey, if you know if we're going to get the whole list, we shouldn't show our name in that list. Once we have this in place, we're also going to modify this query and say that we want it to come in a particular order. So we're going to say query dot add, and you can do ascending or descending, but we're going to do ascending order, and we want all these users to be sorted by their username. Okay, so this will kind of make things look a little bit nicer. Things will be alphabetical. That's actually one of my biggest gripes of Instagram, is that when I look at people who are following me or people that I'm following, like that big list of people, it's not in alphabetical. It doesn't seem to be related to time. It's just like a random mess. That always drives me crazy. But next step for us is, okay, so we've said we don't want ourselves. We want it in this particular order. Now we just have to go ahead and execute the query. So we're going to say query dot find in background. And with this, we're going to hopefully get back a list of user objects. So we're going to create a new find callback, and with this you can see it gives us back a list of parse user objects. So all these callbacks have a little bit of different names, so you got to be ready to find those different ones, but you can see we get a list of these user objects and an exception E. So with this, the first thing that we want to check is just see, hey, do we have any errors with this thing? So we're going to say, hey, if E is equal to null, that means we probably have no errors and we can move forward. But our else in that situation is we've got some sort of error, and so we'll just do a print stack trace on that. But assuming that we have no errors, let's make sure that we have an actual list of objects. So we'll do another if statement here to check the size. So we're going to say if objects.size is greater than 0. This will just be one more check to make sure we've got what we think we have. Then inside, we're going to finish up here with a for loop. So this for loop is going to move through all these objects, which are a bunch of users. So we're going to say capital parse user. We'll give it the name of user as we loop through. We want it to go through all the objects. And once we're here, we want to extract the usernames and put them inside of our array list of usernames. And while I'm looking at this, we can probably get rid of our test user. So we'll go ahead and delete that, but we'll say, all right, usernames dot add, and we simply just want to go ahead and take whatever user we're currently working through in this array, and we're going to, or excuse me, list, and we want to get username and simply add that in there. Okay. Then the only other thing that we want to change about this is, we've done all the correct stuff to get the list view and get an array adapter and stuff, but we only want to set the adapter here after we've gone through this for loop. So we're going to move that line of code down here so that we can have access to it. So with all of this in place, let's go ahead and run our app and see if we can't get this to show up. So we'll go ahead and give this a second here. While it's going, I want to show you a cool feature of parse here, and that's that you can add new items to a class over here on the website. So here I have our users, right? I can hit this plus button to make a new user. We'd have to give it a username here, and I don't know why it's, oh, there we go. It's up at the top here. So maybe I could give it the username of Sarah, and we're going to have to give Sarah a password of maybe something like, oh, let's stick with our ABC123 so we can remember who these are. But look at that. We've all of a sudden added a new user. So let's look at our emulator. Right now it's only showing Nick because we logged in as John, so we know at least we're getting one user back. But now that we've added Sarah, we should see Sarah and Nick showing up. So let's go ahead and run this one more time. Oh, trying to get to Android Studio here. Let's run this one more time. So I hope you enjoyed seeing, you can add things manually here, but with that we should see now Nick and Sarah. Okay, so wasn't all that much code. Now we have successfully a list of all the users excluding ourselves, and you'll notice the order of things is not exactly perfect. With the capitalization of things, it doesn't take that into account, or it does take it into account, so like the capitals work there. In fact, if we go ahead and make this lowercase Sarah, and then we go and run this one more time, you'll notice how that changes. So that's a little bit of a frustrating thing, I think at least, that happens with this app. But let's go ahead and open it up, and look, now it does that. So a little bit something to keep in mind as you're moving forward. But we're making good progress on this, but we haven't even added the ability to upload photos, so still plenty of left to go in this project.